smash that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment below, because what you about to witness is life inside America's deadliest prison, where every corridor echoes with tension, every cell hides secrets, and the walls themselves seem to watch. This is real, raw, and nothing is off limits except fiction. The fluorescent lights flickered over the long concrete corridor, throwing harsh shadows across the gray walls of Highgate Penitentiary. The air was thick with the metallic tang of disinfectant mixed with something far darker, the unmistakable weight of fear and violence barely held in check. Guards shuffled along the tiered walkways, keys jangling at their belts, eyes scanning the rows of cells where men with stories inked deep into their skin waited, each tattoo a silent confession, a warning, or a mark of allegiance. On the second floor, cell 214 stood slightly ajar. Sergeant Hayes, a veteran of 23 years in the system, froze mid-step. A piece of metal protruded from the lock, a clear signal someone had tampered with it. He motioned for Officer Ramirez, who moved cautiously, flashlight cutting through the dim hallway, revealing the intricate tattoos crawling up the inmate's arms, visible even beneath the worn prison jumpsuit. Tattoos weren't just decoration here. They were declarations of loyalty, threats, and histories. Every symbol mattered. Every mark told a story. Inside, Diaries, Inc. Williams shifted nervously on his bunk. His arms were a canvas of bold black lines and cryptic words, wrapping around his biceps like a map of his past life before the walls swallowed him. Tonight, something had changed. The usual hum of clanking doors, distant shouts, and radio chatter seemed muted, replaced by a thick tension, almost imperceptible, that made even seasoned inmates pause mid-breath. "Did anyone hear that?" he muttered, voice low, eyes darting to the bars. His cellmate, Jace Razor McAllister, leaned against the wall, forearms inked with swirling symbols of gangs long dismantled outside these walls. Razor's eyes were sharp, calculating, a man who had survived every lockdown and interrogation, who understood that even a whisper could become a spark. Outside, the prison lockdown protocol was quietly triggered. Lights blinked red above each tier, and the hum of surveillance cameras shifted into a rapid sweep mode, a silent acknowledgement of something amiss. Guards checked cell by cell, their boots echoing through the hallways like distant thunder, shadows flitting across walls painted in peeling blue-gray, the color of despair and cold efficiency. Meanwhile, investigator Claire Dawson stood at the observation deck, her notebook poised. A seasoned mind in criminal psychology and jail investigation, she'd seen patterns like this before: an unexplained breach, subtle misalignments in guard rotations, whispers among inmates that no one outside the system could hear. Her gaze followed the CCTV feeds, focusing on movements too precise to be casual. Tattoos glinted under flickering lights, each one marking its bearer as someone to watch closely. The trigger event had already begun. A guard reported a suspicious package near the laundry block, a route rarely used by inmates due to tight surveillance. Cameras showed a shadow moving against the grain of foot traffic, and for a fraction of a second, the figure paused, then vanished from view, as if swallowed by the walls themselves. Inside cell 214, ink shifted again. His fingers trembled, brushing over a hidden notch in the wall, a mark only he knew. "It's happening tonight," he whispered. Razor's eyes hardened. "Then we better be ready," he replied, voice barely audible over the crackling intercom announcing a code blue lockdown. On the tier above, two guards argued quietly about a missing set of keys, unaware that their distraction played perfectly into the inmate's hands. Outside, in the control room, Dawson leaned closer to the monitor, noticing something strange. A tiny, nearly imperceptible reflection in the glass, a movement not matching any inmate or staff on the roster. The tension was unbearable, a slow burn that gripped every cell block like a living thing. Somewhere in the labyrinth of concrete and steel, alliances were forming, deals being whispered, and a plan, carefully, dangerously, taking shape. Every surveillance camera, every guard's patrol, every tattooed inmate became a player in a game where a single misstep could ignite chaos. And then, the cliffhanger, a loud, metallic snap echoed through the corridors, followed by the harsh voice of the intercom. "All units, secure tier 2 immediately." "This is not a drill." Dawson froze. On the monitor, Cell 214's door was wide open, empty, the bunks untouched, except for a single, blood-red mark scratched across the concrete floor, a cryptic symbol no one recognized. Something critical had been uncovered, and everyone watching knew. This was only the beginning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Highgate Penitentiary woke to a storm of activity. The previous night's alarm still echoed in every guard's mind. The metallic snap, the mysteriously opened cell, and the cryptic symbol etched into the concrete floor. Investigator Claire Dawson moved methodically along the tiered walkways, her boots echoing in rhythm with the nervous chatter of guards and the low murmur of inmates peering through bars. Every step seemed amplified, as if the prison itself held its breath, waiting for the next move. Inside the control room, Dawson traced the CCTV footage frame by frame. Cell 214 had been empty for exactly 6 minutes, and during that time, no one had passed the corner cameras, no doors had been tampered with, and no alarms had been triggered beyond the initial code blue. Her instincts, sharpened from years of jail investigations and high-security prison studies, screamed that this was no ordinary breach. Whoever orchestrated this had inside knowledge, a calculated, precise move that suggested both desperation and planning. Meanwhile, on the second tier, Sergeant Hayes gathered his team of guards for a debriefing. Their eyes flickered between the concrete walls and each other, silently questioning loyalties and mentally cataloging the tattooed inmates whose histories and gang affiliations marked them as potential suspects. Tattoos were more than ink here. They were maps of territory, coded warnings, and, occasionally, silent confessions. Darius, Ink, Williams, and Jace, Razor, McAllister watched the chaos unfold from the shadows of the common area. Ink's arms flexed, the patterns of his tattoos shifting under the harsh lights, each symbol a reminder of his past entanglements and alliances. "We've got eyes everywhere," Razor muttered, scanning the hallway for movement. But now the guards are sniffing around tighter than ever. Any misstep, and it's over. Highgate's warden, a steely-eyed man named Colonel Briggs, paced the office above the tiers, his hands folded behind his back. Every decision mattered. Guards had been reassigned, patrols tightened, and solitary confinement cells cleared for any inmate deemed suspicious. The internal investigation was underway, and Briggs knew that in a prison where every corridor could be a potential escape route, even the smallest oversight could become catastrophic. As Dawson began interviewing inmates, the complexity of the internal network became apparent. Tattoos, nicknames, and gang allegiances created a web of loyalties and grudges. Each inmate had a story, a motive, a secret buried beneath layers of ink and steel. She started with a low-level inmate named Marcus Spider Henderson, his forearms tattooed with a spider web spiraling toward his elbows. "I didn't see nothing," he said, eyes darting, voice barely audible over the hum of fluorescent lights. But Dawson's trained eye caught the slight twitch in his fingers, the hesitation in his tone. Even silence spoke volumes inside these walls. Further down the cell block, a routine guard rotation revealed subtle discrepancies. Officer Ramirez, responsible for Tier 2's evening rounds, reported missing surveillance logs. Footage from cameras near the laundry block had been wiped clean during the precise 6-minute window of the breach. Hayes frowned. "That's deliberate," he said, voice low. "Someone's covering their tracks." The notion sent a ripple of unease through the guard team. The breach wasn't random. It was orchestrated by someone who understood every facet of the prison's security protocols. Inside the solitary confinement wing, the atmosphere was suffocating. Inmates with histories of extreme violence and criminal cunning were isolated, yet they still found ways to communicate. Tattoos peeked from sleeves as hands were gestured subtly. Messages passed through the small bars. Information moved quietly here, faster than guards could detect. Dawson knew that any investigation ignoring these silent channels would fail. Razor and Ink convened in a shadowed corner of the mess hall, discussing their next steps. Razor's tattoos, jagged and black, coiled around his biceps and forearms, symbols of his past gang affiliations and narrow escapes, were a visual reminder that this wasn't his first calculated risk. "The guards are tightening up, cameras everywhere, and Dawson's poking holes in every excuse," he whispered. "We need to know who we can trust, inside and out." Dawson, moving like a predator among prey, collected statements from staff and inmates alike. Some accounts conflicted violently. One guard claimed he saw a shadow move past the laundry block. Another insisted the cell remained untouched. Inmates offered cryptic hints, some pointing fingers while others remained unervingly silent. The conflicting narratives created an intricate puzzle that hinted at betrayal, desperation, and hidden agendas. By mid-afternoon, Dawson uncovered the first concrete clue. A maintenance log indicated that a recently repaired ventilation shaft, overlooked in the latest security audit, aligned perfectly with the location of the mysterious symbol scratched into the concrete floor. It was subtle, almost impossible to spot without knowing exactly where to look. A potential pathway or hiding spot for contraband or tools. Every high-security prison has vulnerabilities. This one was clever, the product of meticulous planning. Meanwhile, the Cellblock's internal politics simmered. Tattoos denoted past allegiances. Inc.'s connections to a now-dispersed gang Razor's reputation as a strategist, and a third inmate Leroy Chains McKnight, whose sprawling tattoos mapped his criminal history, each inked symbol a chapter in a life spent manipulating others. Alliances shifted constantly, invisible threads tugging at the edges of loyalty. Dawson observed quietly, knowing that any insight into these dynamics could crack the case wide open. Hours later, a shift in guard rotations triggered a tense encounter. Inc. was cornered near the recreation yard, tattoos glinting in the harsh artificial light, when a pair of guards approached. His stance was defensive but calm, a subtle warning etched in every motion. "You're making mistakes if you think I'll slip up," he muttered, eyes scanning escape routes. Guards recorded everything, their notebooks filled with every word, gesture, and nuance. Every action inside Highgate Penitentiary was a potential clue. As night fell, Dawson pieced together what little evidence she had. The open cell, the wiped surveillance footage, the ventilation shaft, and the cryptic symbol formed a thread she could follow, but the picture was incomplete. Someone had orchestrated a plan to manipulate both inmates and guards, and the motivations were hidden behind layers of psychology, desperation, and coded allegiance. And then, just as the night reached its darkest point, a guard called out over the intercom, voice tight with tension, "Investigator Dawson, you need to see this." Tier 3's camera caught something. Someone shouldn't be there. Dawson rushed to the monitor, heart pounding. The feed showed a figure moving along the shadows of the upper tier, inked arms catching the dim light. It wasn't Ink or Razor. Whoever it was had intimate knowledge of guard schedules and surveillance blind spots. The investigation was no longer a matter of piecing together events. It was a race against time, unraveling the internal workings of Highgate before the orchestrator struck again. The internal investigation had begun, but the deeper Dawson dug, the more dangerous it became. Prison politics, inmate alliances, guard vulnerabilities, and hidden motives formed a deadly labyrinth. One misstep could mean not just failure, but serious consequences for everyone inside. And just as the clock struck midnight, a guard's radio crackled. Code red, Tier 2. "Someone's tampering with the control panel. We've got a situation." The prison's walls seemed to tighten around everyone. The shadows lengthened, and Dawson realized the truth. In Highgate, nothing was random, nothing was accidental, and the real story behind the trigger event was only beginning to unfold. The silence of Highgate Penitentiary that morning was deceptive. The echoes of last night's alarms still lingered in every corridor, a ghostly reminder that the walls had witnessed more than just routine confinement. Investigator Claire Dawson moved methodically along the tiers, her boots scraping against the cold concrete, eyes scanning every detail. Every tattooed inmate, every guard, every shadow could hold the key to understanding what had unfolded and what was about to erupt. Inside the control room, Dawson pieced together the previous night's footage with meticulous attention. The silhouette in the utility corridor had vanished as suddenly as it appeared, leaving only faint dust prints and a subtle misalignment of control panel switches. Someone had navigated the high-security prison like a ghost, exploiting both human and technological weaknesses with precise knowledge of guard rotations, surveillance blind spots, and the psychological patterns of inmates. Diaries, Inc. Williams lay on his bunk, tracing the familiar patterns of his tattoos absent-mindedly, each swirl and line marking a chapter of his life behind bars. Razor leaned against the cell wall, eyes sharp and calculating. The breach, the alarms, the manipulations, it wasn't random. It was orchestrated, and it was escalating. They're setting the board, Razor whispered. And we're not the kings of this game anymore. Highgate's internal dynamics were becoming increasingly tangled. Prison gangs, fractured yet resilient, navigated the tension with careful precision. Tattoos functioned as silent communication, a subtle glance, a flick of an arm, a movement across a shoulder, all symbols deciphered only by those who knew the language of ink, survival, and dominance. Dawson understood this. Her background in criminal psychology allowed her to read gestures, microexpressions, and behavioral anomalies, piecing together motives hidden beneath layers of fear, desperation, and calculation. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely source, Marcus Spider Henderson, a low-level inmate whose spiderweb tattoo spiraled across his forearm. Initially dismissive, Spider finally spoke under careful observation. "It wasn't ink or razor," he muttered, eyes darting to the bars. "Someone else is moving things, pulling strings. They're using us to cover their tracks." His voice trembled, revealing both fear and the subtle pride of a man aware that he had insider knowledge. Dawson scribbled furiously. Every detail mattered. The name unspoken, the subtle allusion to alliances beyond immediate observation, the implicit warning in the way he avoided eye contact. Meanwhile, guards continued their patrols with heightened vigilance, but cracks were appearing. Officer Ramirez noticed minor irregularities, logs that didn't match rotations, minor sabotage in surveillance equipment, and unexplained anomalies in cell checks. Sergeant Hayes, seasoned and unflappable, studied the behavior of both inmates and staff, noting how even the smallest oversight could be exploited. "There's more here than a simple breach," he muttered. "This is someone testing the limits, seeing what the prison will allow before it fights back." The investigation's complexity intensified as Dawson cross-referenced maintenance logs, guard reports, and inmate interactions. A faint, deliberate misalignment in one of the ventilation shafts revealed that the figure had exploited a previously unnoticed architectural flaw. The shaft connected cell 214 to a restricted access corridor, a perfect pathway for subtle manipulation. It was the work of someone highly intelligent, someone who understood criminal psychology, the behavior of guards, and the dynamics of inmates, all while remaining invisible. Razor and Ink convened in the recreation yard, observing the escalating tension among inmates. Leroy Chains McKnight, was becoming increasingly unpredictable. His heavily inked arms glimmered under the harsh fluorescent lights as he navigated social hierarchies, exploiting weaknesses and testing loyalties. "Chains is moving fast," Razor whispered. "Watch him. He is either the next piece of the puzzle or the one setting it all up." The human element of the investigation was mirrored by surveillance breakthroughs. Dawson noticed that camera angles in rarely used corridors had been subtly manipulated, evidence of prior knowledge and meticulous planning. Inmate interrogations revealed cryptic hints, references to the shadows, timed moves, and who's really watching. Each word was weighted with potential meaning, requiring careful interpretation to avoid false leads. Pressure mounted when a guard discovered a partially tampered access panel in the electrical room. The manipulation was sophisticated but incomplete, suggesting that someone had been interrupted, or that the plan was designed to test both the guards' attention and the limits of prison security protocols. The realization sent shockwaves through Dawson's team. Highgate was being studied from within, a live investigation in real time, and the orchestrator was operating several steps ahead. By late afternoon, alliances among inmates became increasingly visible. Tattoos, once silent symbols of history and affiliation, now acted as a form of coded communication. Ink noted fleeting glances exchanged between certain prisoners and subtle hand gestures, a language invisible to guards but visible to those versed in prison dynamics. Razor observed that even minor provocations were being orchestrated to distract the investigation, creating confusion and misdirection. The truth behind the walls was becoming clearer. The orchestrator was not just planning an escape or breach. They were studying Highgate, understanding every psychological nuance of guards and inmates alike, manipulating perceptions, and preparing for an escalation that could have devastating consequences. Dawson realized that without identifying the central figure, the internal investigation would remain reactive, constantly one step behind a mind that understood the criminal ecosystem better than anyone else. Night fell, blue-toned lights casting long shadows across the concrete corridors. Dawson returned to the control room, analyzing footage once more. The mysterious figure appeared again, not on the cameras directly, but as subtle movements caught in reflective surfaces, shadows shifting against expectations, evidence of deliberate strategy. Every step, every gesture was calculated. The cliffhanger arrived when Dawson noticed an unusual pattern. A coded message scratched faintly into a secondary corridor, partially obscured, nearly invisible. It suggested premeditation, coordination, and an intimate understanding of prison procedures. Whoever had left it had observed everything: guards, inmates, procedures, and knew exactly how to manipulate outcomes. Highgate Penitentiary had revealed its first layer of truth, but the deeper layers, the hidden motives, covert alliances, and betrayals among inmates, were only beginning to surface. The walls themselves seemed to hold secrets, and the orchestrator's shadow loomed over every cell, every corridor, every tattooed arm. And then, just as Dawson leaned closer to decipher the coded message, a sudden alarm blared. The utility corridor's access panel had been opened remotely. A voice over the intercom, tense and authoritative, called out, "All units, Tier 2 and 3, possible breach attempt. Lockdown protocols are in effect." Repeat, lockdown protocols are in effect. The prison, already a pressure cooker of fear, suspicion, and manipulation, had entered its most dangerous phase yet. Highgate was no longer just a site of confinement. It was a live chessboard, and every player, guard, investigator, and inmate, was now in immediate danger. The orchestrator was closer, smarter, and more ruthless than anyone had anticipated, and the walls themselves seemed to tighten around every breath, every movement, and every secret. The tension inside Pelican Bay's SHU thickened by the hour, settling into the concrete like moisture. By mid-afternoon, the entire C corridor felt electrically charged, as if the lights themselves were waiting for something to happen. Every guard walked tighter. Every inmate listened harder. Every sound, keys, radios, metal doors, felt amplified through the blue-toned haze that coated the wing. Internal affairs had doubled their presence. Their jackets moved like dark shapes in the dim corridor, their whisper briefings echoing behind closed doors. They had interviewed nearly every inmate on the tier, yet no one had cracked, no one had slipped, no one had offered so much as a breadcrumb. And that silence worried them more than lies ever could, because silence meant coordination. And coordination inside solitary confinement meant someone had influence far beyond their walls. Todd Ashker sat on the edge of his mattress, elbows on his knees, tattooed knuckles folded together. After decades in the SHU, he could read the rhythm of the block better than any guard. And right now, the rhythm was wrong. Too many interruptions, too many sudden changes in procedure, too many guarded expressions on officers' faces. But what unsettled him most wasn't the investigation. It was the inmates. They were too quiet. Men who hadn't spoken to each other in years were suddenly communicating through the vents, short phrases, coded breaths, taps against metal. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't panic. It was alignment, a rare and dangerous thing in a place designed to crush unity. Across the corridor, Moss Renner sat in the shadows of his cell, one tattooed arm resting casually on his knee. His expression was calm, too calm. Moss had always been the type to observe, measure, calculate. But today, there was something sharper behind his eyes. At exactly 2:13 p.m., a loud crash tore through the corridor. Metal hitting concrete. Then another. Guards sprinted toward the source, radios exploding with overlapping voices. C-14. Move. Code blue on the tier. Possible assault. Respond now. But when they reached the cell, the scene didn't match the panic. The inmate inside, Victor Hale, a heavily tattooed man with a reputation for a short fuse and long sentences, stood with his back against the wall, breathing hard. His fists were clenched, his shoulders twitching with tension. But there was no assault, no victim, no fight, just a shattered light fixture lying on the floor beside his bunk. One of the guards raised his baton. "You trying to start something, Hale?" Victor shook his head slowly. "Light fell," he muttered. "Been loose for weeks." It hadn't. Not in a facility like Pelican Bay. A falling light meant tampering, and tampering meant access. And access meant someone inside the SHU had touched something they should never be able to reach. Internal affairs moved in fast, They tore the cell apart, mattress flipped, toilet inspected, vents checked, every inch scanned. But they found nothing. No contraband, no tools, no messages. Nothing but the unmistakable sense that Hale had done exactly what he intended. He created a diversion. While IA crowded the cell, another guard at the opposite end of the tiers suddenly shouted, "Sir, we've got movement on the lower surveillance grid." Ashker froze. Movement on a SHU surveillance grid meant one thing. A blind spot had just opened somewhere else. Two investigators darted to the monitoring station. A technician stared at the screen, sweat gathering at his temple. "Feed just dropped in D corridor," he said. 5 seconds blackout. Then it came back. 5 seconds. Enough time for a handoff. A message. A hidden object moved. A code exchanged. Too precise to be accidental. Moss spoke through his vent. "They're playing chess," he murmured. "IA's playing checkers." Ashker didn't answer. He was listening to something else, the faint tapping in the pipes beneath his floor. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 knocks. 2 more. One long drag of metal across steel. A pattern repeating from the night before. This time, he counted the sequences carefully. It wasn't random communication. It was timing. The inmates were marking guard rotations, mapping the corridor like a living blueprint. They were moving information through the plumbing system faster than IA could contain it. As the tapping continued, Internal Affairs ordered another tier lockdown. Doors slammed shut, lights dimmed, and guards took defensive positions. But even under full lockdown, the tension kept rising. At 3:06 p.m., something happened that changed the tone completely. A guard screamed. Not a shout, not a command. A scream, raw, loud, terrified, echoing up the stairwell from the lower tier. 3 guards rushed down, batons drawn. Internal Affairs followed. Moments later, a voice came through the radio. "Officer down, but not attacked." He passed out. Eyes open, not responsive. Something's wrong. Ashker's breath slowed. Another guard incapacitated. Another unexplained collapse. Another moment with no witnesses and no clear cause. This wasn't violence. This wasn't an assault. This was strategy. Inmates didn't need weapons to destabilize a unit. They needed timing, precision, misdirection, and someone guiding it from the shadows. A medic arrived, pushed through the barricade, and crouched beside the fallen guard. No visible injuries. No blood. No marks. Just a bewildered expression and trembling hands. "What happened?" the medic asked. The guard shook his head weakly. I don't know. Lights flickered. Heard something in the pipes. Then everything just spun. Lights flickered. Pipes. Loss of balance." Ashker's jaw tightened. This wasn't coincidence. This was environmental. Someone had figured out how to manipulate stress points inside the SHU to mount psychological pressure on the staff. Internal Affairs took over the stairwell. Investigators barked orders, tension spiking. The officer was lifted onto a stretcher and carried out. The unit fell into a deeper silence. And then, from the vent beside Ashker's bed, Moss whispered, "You see it yet?" Ashker stayed quiet. Moss continued, voice low and steady. "They think this is about escape. They think this is about a weapon." A pause. "They're wrong." Ashker finally spoke, barely above a breath. "What is it about?" Moss exhaled slowly. "Control." He let the word linger, then added, "You feel it shifting, don't you?" Before Ashker could reply, a guard pounded on his door. "C8. Prepare for strip search and cell inspection, now." Ashker stepped back. 2 IA investigators entered. But the moment they flipped his mattress, the moment they pulled up the steel-framed bedding, the moment they checked the vent, the hallway erupted with another shout. "Sir, we found something underneath the walkway outside C7. The investigator rushed out. Ashker stood still, his cell half torn apart. Outside, boots thundered toward the location. Something was lifted. Someone cursed under their breath. And then the sentence that froze the tier. "It's a blueprint." Every voice stopped. A second voice added, "And it's accurate." Ashker closed his eyes. Someone inside their world of concrete and silence had mapped the entire ventilation grid. Something even some guards didn't fully understand. And if Phase 1 was complete, if Phase 2 was already in motion, then Phase 3 was coming. The blueprint rustled as investigators unfolded it. One of them whispered the final words. This wasn't an escape plan. It's something much worse. The early morning blue-toned lights flickered across Tier 2 as Highgate Penitentiary braced for the unknown. Alarm bells still echoed faintly from last night's disturbances, but this time, there was a grim precision to the lockdown. Investigator Claire Dawson, notebook in hand, navigated the corridors with the measured caution of someone who understood that one wrong move could unravel the entire operation, or end her career, or worse, compromise lives. The orchestrator of the chaos was no longer a shadow. Surveillance footage, cross-referenced with earlier anomalies, revealed subtle patterns in movement. Every empty cell, every manipulated camera, every misaligned guard rotation converged on a single figure. Leroy Chains McKnight, tattooed arms gleaming in the harsh lights, had been orchestrating a series of calculated diversions, testing both guards and inmates to gauge their reactions. His motives were complex, part desperation, part assertion of dominance, part psychological game, but they were now fully exposed. Chains had not been working alone. Darius, Inc., Williams, and Jace Razor McAllister, though previously implicated, had acted as pawns, manipulated through silent signals, coded gestures, and unspoken threats. Their tattoos, once symbols of power and allegiance, had unintentionally marked them as tools in a larger plan. Dawson knew the psychological intricacies at play: fear, loyalty, and survival instincts intersecting to create a tense, unpredictable scenario. Highgate's internal communications erupted. Guards were mobilized to critical junctions, every patrol doubled, and every access point scrutinized. Sergeant Hayes coordinated with Officer Ramirez to isolate Chains' movements. Cameras focused on every corridor, yet Chains had already anticipated these countermeasures, exploiting blind spots and shadows, using both architectural knowledge and keen understanding of human behavior to navigate the prison with near invisibility. The first confrontation erupted near the utility corridor. Chains attempted to access the central control panel, likely intending to override security systems. Hayes and Ramirez arrived just in time, guns drawn but ready to subdue without unnecessary escalation. Chains, forearms and shoulders glinting with tattoos, faced them with a calculated calm. Each line of ink was a reminder of past manipulations, survival, and a life steeped in criminal mastery. "Step away from the panel," Hayes barked, voice echoing against the concrete. Chains tilted his head, eyes scanning escape routes, then made a sudden movement toward the panel. Ramirez lunged, intercepting him, and a tense struggle ensued. The fight was brief but charged with raw tension, the kind built over years of high-security confinement, calculated risk, and intimate knowledge of human psychology. Dawson, monitoring via CCTV, noted every gesture, every calculated push, every attempt to manipulate perception. Simultaneously, Ink and Razor, realizing the central orchestrator was exposed, took deliberate steps to distance themselves from Chains while preserving their survival. Their tattoos glimmered under flickering lights, silent signals to each other and others in the cell block, indicating allegiance, awareness, and caution. Prison alliances, once murky and shifting, had crystallized in the crucible of escalating danger. The psychological chessboard shifted again when Dawson observed a hidden ally of Chains attempting to manipulate a secondary security panel. The guard responsible, a young officer unfamiliar with subtle deviations in routine, nearly allowed access. Quick thinking by Hayes and Ramirez neutralized the threat. It was a stark reminder. In Highgate, danger was not always overt, and understanding criminal psychology was as crucial as physical vigilance. With the orchestrator contained, Dawson orchestrated coordinated interrogations. Chains remained defiant, but revealed motives under careful questioning. The breaches, the manipulations, the coded messages, they were not random acts of rebellion. They were calculated experiments to study Highgate's internal weaknesses, to expose vulnerabilities in surveillance, guard protocols, and inmate behavior. Each tattooed inmate had been a variable in the experiment, some willingly, some unknowingly. Highgate's prisoners, under lockdown, absorbed the events with cautious curiosity. Tattoos that had once signified power or allegiance now told a story of survival and manipulation. Inmates whispered to each other, interpreting what had occurred, understanding that power within these walls was fluid and that even the smallest misstep could be exploited. By mid-afternoon, Dawson had pieced together the full sequence. Chains had used coded messages, subtle manipulations of physical spaces, and a deep understanding of inmate psychology to orchestrate a series of events that tested the prison's systems. Ink and Razor, once central suspects, were ultimately collaborators under duress, guided by both self-preservation and unspoken rules of prison survival. The prison's surveillance, guard rotations, and structural vulnerabilities had been stress-tested, revealing cracks that needed immediate attention. In a final, tense moment, Chains was escorted to solitary confinement, tattoos catching the harsh fluorescent light as if branding his history of cunning and manipulation. Dawson closed her notebook, understanding that while the orchestrator had been contained, the lessons were far-reaching. Highgate was secure, for now, but every corner, every corridor, every tattooed inmate remained a potential variable in a system that balanced on the edge of chaos. The resolution was both professional and haunting. Highgate Penitentiary remained high security, but the awareness of vulnerabilities lingered. Guards adjusted protocols, cameras were upgraded, and psychological monitoring increased. Yet, the orchestrator's shadow left a subtle, permanent mark on everyone involved. The prisoners understood. Even in containment, strategy, knowledge, and cunning could bend the rules in unexpected ways. As the day drew to a close, Dawson walked along the now quiet corridors, shadows stretching long across the blue-toned walls. Tattoos on the arms of inmates caught the fading light, silent witnesses to both the chaos and the resolution. Highgate had survived, but the human psychology, cunning strategies, and calculated risks within these walls had left an indelible mark. And then, in the final, dark moment, Dawson glanced back at cell 214. There, almost imperceptible, a faint scratch on the wall caught her eye. A small symbol, new, unrecognized, and barely visible. Highgate had revealed its secrets, yet one subtle mystery remained, a quiet reminder that in prisons, nothing is ever truly contained. If this prison case stunned you, the next one will be even darker. Subscribe so you don't miss it.